It's the Awake Space, and I'm Laurie Rivers, your host, here to help you with some inspiration to get those aspirations out into the world. And for the next couple of weeks, I'm coming to you from the UK. That's right, I'm in London. Last week, I let you in on it. I moved up my trip by 2 weeks. I extended it by 2 weeks. I wasn't coming out until after the 17th because Matilda, Medium Matilda, and I are doing an event on the 16th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, the 17th in Australia at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, or 1 in the morning if you're in London, like I'll be. I wasn't going to come out because I had that event, but I took a look at my Venus return and I was like, oh, it's juicier in London. And I went live on Mother's Day on TikTok, and it was like, you look so well rested. Why, yes, I did indeed sleep. Thank you very much for noticing. Hang on, let's take care of that pillow. There we go. That looks better, doesn't it? All right. I'm coming from jolly old England, meeting up with my daughter, doing some rebranding, getting ourselves. We're going to be rebranding all year long. That's one of the reasons I decided to relocate for my Venus return because it ended up being a 10th house, like right on the midheaven Venus return. And if you don't know astrology, that doesn't mean anything. But let's put it this way, it was right in line with what we're going with. There's no such thing as a bad Venus return. It shows where you're most likely to benefit and to receive information when you look at the house that Venus is in. You don't read a return chart the same way you read a natal chart. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're talking about the returns. They're talking about the transit to the natal chart versus the actual chart a return makes. It's always interesting recording on the road. I will be getting a studio to rent for some other parts of the project I'm here working on. I know. But for this, we're doing it in the apartment in London. This episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about location, why locational astrology is one of the oldest forms of astrology, and why you don't have to relocate to have a better return, as well as why you might want to, like I did. It worked with my goals, right? So when I was looking at getting my ticket to come out, I decided, hey, wait, I know my Venus return is in May. Let's take a look. What's the difference? And I bought my ticket like 5 minutes after looking at the chart. I was like, nope, we're relocating because we can. It would have been good no matter what. So again, that's something we're going to talk about. Why relocating can help. Why sometimes it's absolutely not necessary, and what you're not seeing a lot of times without experience. Okay, experience plays a role in any profession because knowledge isn't power unless you know how to use it. And how do you know how to use that knowledge? Time and practice, making mistakes, learning from them. I think my biggest beef with No Child Left Behind is it taught people to be very, very afraid of making mistakes and not getting the answer right the first time because of all the state testing. And it really robbed people of the ability to know how to learn because we learn through trial and error and experience. I actually look forward to mistakes because mistakes help me grow and learn. I wouldn't be here if you've heard the term fail forward. That sums up life pretty well. This idea that things have to be conditionally perfect before you can get things moving. Well, nobody who has attained any measure of success would have done that without making mistakes. So, if I could give you one piece of advice for the next 7 years with Uranus and Gemini, it's operate from a sense of curiosity. Be willing to fail. Be willing to fail. Being willing to take that knowledge and turn it into something, because sometimes the mistakes end up giving you the best ideas, the best pathway forward. It's essential. So we'll be talking about that. And then I've got a boatload of questions from patrons at the magazine level and up. I'll be addressing some of those here on this podcast. And then part two for a patron exclusive for our community in their exclusive podcast, because man, these questions are good. So I'll do a part one and a part two. Part one will be here. Part two will be in the Awake Space community. Speaking of, you guys are amazing. Thank you for all the Mother's Day wishes and also for the best thing ever. There was an autocorrect mistake. All right. On one of my quips, I had put up just a really pretty photo. And to be honest, I don't think about things like Mother's Day, Father's Day, all the holidays because I left the United States really, really young at 18 and I came of age. I became an adult overseas where those holidays were practiced very differently. You know, I lived in 23 countries, 4 continents before I was 25 years old. Between 18 and 25, man, I lived out of my suitcase. Can she pack? Yes, she can. I also learned what I need, what I don't need. Talk about an experiential learner. But anyway, you change when you travel. You know, that's why the ninth house is about expansion. It is higher education, philosophy, law, anything you can debate, basically, and things that expand the mind. Debate should expand the mind. It isn't just a fight where one side's trying to win. It should be to expand understanding, right? We've lost the definitions over the years. People, we misuse words all the time. Knock it off, people. But anyway, so I see the world differently. So, but it's always nice to be wished a happy anything, you know, if it's meaningful to you. And being a mother is meaningful to me. It always has been. I wanted to be a mom. I never wanted to be married. I was right when I was 6 years old because I told my mom I wanted kids and I didn't want a husband. And she thought, what on earth is that girl on about? And I have to say, 6 year old me was right about my life. But anywho, my kids are my treasures. And I'm getting time with one. Got a beautiful message from the other. And that's the most meaningful thing for me. So, but the mistake, their autocorrect said, Happy Mothership Day. So, if Mother's Day has been a hard day for you, if it's because of loss or estrangement, or you don't want to be, or you were and you're not, Happy Mothership Day to you. I think that's pretty good. So why don't you get your tea, get your coffee, get your matcha, get your H2O, and we're going to be talking about why location matters in astrology, like from the beginning, and why astro-cartography is not separate from astrology. Astrocartography is locational astrology. It's put on a map. I don't know why people try to make it a separate modality. It's not deeper than regular astrology. It gives you a visual cue. That's what it does. But we'll talk about that in a little more depth, and then we'll give some community news and updates. Again, I want to remind you, you can sign up for Charts and Channeling with Matilda and I on, and if you don't know who medium Matilda is, she's a crazy accurate medium, professional medium, has been for over 20 years. I've been a professional practicing astrologer for almost 30 years now. We're getting close. Like 28 years. Isn't that crazy? To be so old as I walk around London going, it was easier to do this a long time ago when I was a student. But anyway, you can sign up for our event. Link in the show notes. It's $50, guys. It's $50 and it's over 2 hours long. I can guarantee you that. We don't want to go much past 3 because we both have a ton of stuff to do. Matilda's off on her own adventures after the event. So we don't want to wear her out for those. She's got cool stuff coming up as well. And if you haven't seen the two of us in action, you want to, because we're a whole show. We are sassy when we are together, and I'm sure we will be, because it'll be like 1 a.m. here in London while I'm doing it. So I'll be a little punch drunk, but we'll have our favorite snacks. We will. And speaking of snacks, we got a new moon in Taurus coming up, and we'll wind up the podcast talking about what I think we'll see in that. If you're looking for my predictions, those are always put out to my Awake Space community members. I don't put those out in public anymore. I know that's why a lot of people followed and watched me. But that's not the bulk of my work. Those are like my parlor tricks, guys. Yes, I'm really accurate. If you want to find out about how accurate I am, check the show notes. I've got a link to a free PDF that shows you how I'm doing on the year. It's all based off my 2026 year ahead slides that I wrote back in June, actually May and June of 2025. And my wonderful archivist has put together a collection to have you see where we stand on the year, and it'll come out every single month in the Awake Space community. All right, get your tea, get your coffee, get your matcha, get your Red Bull, get your H2O. And whether we're going to school, grabbing the kids, winding up a PhD thesis, going into the shower, driving through traffic, or getting on a jet plane, we're going to do this together. Why, yes, I am well rested. The minute my butt hit the seat of the airplane from Denver to London, my eyes closed. In fact, the flight attendant had to help me get my seatbelt on before we took off because I was out. I was crashed. So exhausted because I just, man, between the energy leading up to Uranus moving into Gemini, and then the minute it popped into Gemini, my personal transits were very overstimulating. Like my nervous system was just like plugged into a light socket. And so I did not get enough rest. I knew I would once I hit the plane. I was like, there's no way I won't sleep on that flight. And oh my God, I did. I slept. And I've managed to get really good sleep ever since. So if I look more rested, it's because I am. And I'm going to be getting my well-earned massage on Monday. As you're listening to this, I'm going to be on a massage table because I used to, and this is true, folks, because I do a lot of seated work and work at the computer. I used to have a weekly massage just to get the lymphatic drainage going, just to work out the kinks, avoid the tech neck. And then when I moved to Wyoming, there was one massage therapist within 50 miles of me, and then they broke their arm. So I wasn't able to get a massage. So that's one of the first things they did was book a massage. That happens tomorrow. That's what I'm working towards. I did have my tea on my Venus return of May 7th, and it was lovely. Especially the tea, the actual tea, not just the little sandwiches and the tea cakes. It was the tea. Man, you forget how good actual English tea is until you have it in England. And then you're like, oh yeah, this is what tea is supposed to be like. Tasty. But anywho, let's talk about why location matters. So in Western tropical astrology, especially using Placidus houses. Now this could also go for Koch houses, that's Koch, Koch house system, or Regimentus, or even Porphyry. And I use Porphyry when people are born at extreme latitudes. So if somebody was born in Lapland, up north, or very, very, like southern tip of South America, that kind of thing. We can use Porphyry for that if it's a extreme latitudes, because in Placidus, it doesn't quite work out math wise. There's people who are hell-bent on saying don't use it, the ancients didn't use it, and I'm going to say, well, the ancients didn't use it because they didn't have the math, but they certainly did theorize it. So Ptolemy theorized Placidus, and the Islamic scholars, when during the Middle Ages, especially the Dark Ages in Europe, really took those Greek writings and advanced them forward. It's really funny to hear the Islamophobia in the astrological world when they'll be like, the Arabs took the Greeks' work, they stole it. No, they honored it and expanded on it. The lack of critical thinking astounds me some days in what passes for so-called academia. But anyway, Ptolemy did theorize it. They didn't have the math. They didn't use zero yet. Zero didn't come into use until the 10th century Common Era. It's not hard. It's not hard to figure out. Okay, we just have to ask some questions. There we go. So it had to do with the math. In fact, and I wrote an article about this in the Awake Space. I wrote it tired, so it could be like 3 different articles. I reread it earlier today and I was like, wow, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. You wrote tired, didn't you? But it's a lot of information. So read through it. And if you go, wow, that could be 3 different articles. Yeah, it could be. I'll accept your judgment. I wrote it fast and furious. Well, I was like, I need to get out an article. I was probably like sleep typing or something. Anyway, when it comes to Western tropical astrology, when you look at an astrology chart, the center bit is Earth. Okay, so if you're standing in the center of the wheel, that bold line that equals the horizon, and at one end is the ascendant, at the other end is the descendant, in between is the line. You're standing in a parking lot. You're facing the hospital. You look up, and everything above that you're looking up at is above that line. Everything below is below the feet, below the horizon. And so the ascendant is the sign that rises above the horizon. The horizon is a physical spot. Okay, so if you're standing and let's say it's flat. Let's say you're in Kansas, okay? And it's flat and you can see for miles and miles and miles. There's nothing impeding your view. That horizon line, it's where the sun rises in the east, okay? That's the ascendant. It's a flipped map. The ascendant is east, the descendant is west. So everything rises and sets east to west. That's why when we're drawing a chart, we need not just the date of birth, but the time of birth and the place of birth, because depending on where you live, the sun rises and sets differently. Okay, it's location based. That's why Alaska is known as the land of the midnight sun. Because in the summertime, they don't have a lot of nighttime, and in the wintertime, they don't have a lot of daylight, which is why we will use porphyry to many cases if they're born like super north in Alaska. Juno, not so much. Juno, we just use Placidus. There are lots of classes out there on how to hand do a chart with the math. American Federation of Astrologers. I recommend Alan Oken's Complete Astrology if you really want that foundation. There used to be these arguments on whether you could even be a good astrologer if you couldn't do the math part all the way on your own, or if you just did a chart on a computer. And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and both. I think understanding how a chart is made is essential to being a good astrologer. I don't think you have to hand draw every chart to be a good astrologer. That's the part people were really paying for back in the day, because it could take, 12, 13, 15 hours to do the math to draw a chart. And then our interpretation kind of lacked. It was very deterministic. Because, think about it, the type of brain it takes to do all that math isn't always very good at communicating through language skills. That's just, sometimes it is. Some people have the ability to do both. Not everybody does. And cultures were also very deterministic at the time as well. So for me, as a progressive evolutionary astrologer, and because my teachers emphasized this about me, they were like, hey, you need to specialize in interpretation, because we need more people moving interpretation forward, giving it more depth, more breadth. Because otherwise, you just do a computer printout, you get a general idea. It's not nuanced, it's not individualized. And it was revolutionary in the 70s, 80s, 90s, because we couldn't do that before. It granted more access. Sometimes you lose quality because everybody can do it, and we lose focus on making it all really good. We lose skills. And I don't think it has to be that way, but that's how it has been done. So I emphasize the spectrum of expression that the planets make, the signs make, how the placements are in the houses and in the interrelationship of those things together. That's why we've been doing aspects in the natal chart in the astrology crew. Make sure you check the collection in the astrology class library, the natal aspects library. Go through all those classes. If you're brand new and you just joined the astrology crew, get caught up. Get caught up, because when you go to ask me questions, a lot of times I'm going to refer you back to the material there. There's like almost 50 hours worth of recorded classes that are in depth, and there's layers to the information in there. So I highly suggest you go check those out. So location, location, location is everything. Locational astrology is one of the oldest forms of astrology. The three magi, the three wise men used it looking for that star because location is always part of astrology. We're making sense of events. Your birth is an event. It forms a whole energy system. Your birth chart is your personal schematic. Like, think about it. Like, you're an engineer in Star Trek. Maybe you're the engineer of the USS Enterprise, and it has these blueprints, these schematics. That's your birth chart. Your birth chart is the schematics for you. And just like you have power cubes or crystals that are used to fuel the USS Enterprise, so too your sun will have different qualities, right? Not every Aries sun is impulsive in the same way. Some may be more of a napper, others don't nap at all. Some Aries suns love to run and be active, and others are more academic. You can't paint it with a wide brush. We can explain why those differences happen. Not today. That's more of an astrology class. But we know there's a spectrum of expression, and that's what I focus on. Location, location, location helps us know how that can express. So, like an Aries born in Lapland is not going to be the same as an Aries born in the Amazon forest. They may have shared qualities, though. There may be enough in common they can go, hey, you and me, we'll like each other. Location, location, location. It gives us the ascendant, it gives us the IC, the descendant, and the midheaven. The IC is the Immun and Coli, it's the bottom of the chart. Okay. It's our home base. It's our interior life versus our exterior life, which is the top of the chart. And the seventh house, the descendant, how we share our energy with other people who are close to us, people we are in commitment to. I saw a great example of that in Hyde Park. My daughter and I walk in Hyde Park pretty much every morning, and there are swans there, and swans mate for life. Swans commit for life. It's very sad when a swan's mate dies. Okay, very sad. But there is a couple of swans. There's a pair, and they are nesting right now, and they have this area cordoned off as they sit on the eggs. And one of them was sitting on the nest, and the other was laying outside the cordoned area near their partner. So kind of keeping watch. And that's commitment. There's a contract there. We're going to mate for life. We're going to reproduce our goslings together. And I've got your back while you're vulnerable on this nest. And that's seventh house right there. That's not fifth house romance. That's seventh house commitment. That's the contract that's there. And it's a beautiful one. So a lot of times when we're talking locational astrology, most people think they have to do astro-cartography to see if a location is good. And I'm going to say astro-cartography, which is cool, okay, it's modern. Modern doesn't mean bad. In fact, I think astro-cartography advanced our understanding of locational astrology. It was created by Jim Lewis, who was an amazing mathematician and cartographer. He understood modern cartography methods. And what he did is he superimposed the placements of a chart onto a physical map, understanding that an astrology chart is a friggin' map. Okay, you can navigate with that thing depending on what your points of reference are going to be. Unfortunately, Jim Lewis passed away in 1995, which is the year astrology came hurtling at me. And remember, I was going to prove it wrong. Whoops. Joke was on me. Anyway, his friends so believed in his work that they made sure it got published. Okay. But that was a few years later. I think it got published in like 99 or something like that. You can look it up. It's a simple Google search, and you can find his book out there as well. Astrocartography is not a separate subject from astrology. It's an extension of it. It's not even really a sub-branch. It's an extension and a visual representation of something we've done for millennia, even before Placidus existed. Okay, location mattered. Why would you need location? Well, human beings have always moved around. And you would have things like armies going into battle. You'd be looking at weather patterns for harvests, etc. And merchants traveled. Funny enough, archaeology keeps finding out that people were doing trade long before our 19th century archaeologists and anthropologists with their biases said they were. So it's not like the ancients weren't as smart as us. I don't think intelligence has changed all that much. We often limit through that, but there were less people on the planet and less science to make sense of the world, which is where superstition and magical thinking come from, right? Is when we're trying to make sense of things that don't make sense, we're going to assign meaning in some kind of way. There's nothing more human than to make a story of something. So, astrocartography is not the only way or the only kind of way we're going to see where somewhere can be a good place to live. I think it's very reductionist, and I've seen some really big mistakes made. I've had to help people move off lines they thought they were good, but it's my Jupiter line. I thought it'd be good. And I'm like, oh, it could be a lot. And it can be growth. And growing is cool, but growing is often uncomfortable. Just like Pluto can be a difficult line to be on, it can you may be transforming more than you want to. But for other people, that's exactly where they need to be, want to be. You know, and I have moved people off of Pluto line. Let me tell you, it took a minute because Pluto can be like obsessive, so it can stick to you like glue. It can be something else. When we're looking for good places to live, you have to get past good and bad. Because guess what? There will always be life circumstances. But there are, depending on the goal of what you want to achieve, what do you want your quality of life to be? There's going to be places that ameliorate that better than others. If you need peace and quiet, moving to a city center is probably not going to be the best route for you. Maybe a Mars line isn't where you want to be, where life is going to be very, very active. Fine. Astrocartography should never cost you an arm and a leg. Two, if you're getting a reading that involves astrocartography, you need to have some locational astrology thrown in as well. Because when you relocate, your houses change. Okay, the ascendant all the way through the rest of the chart, depending on how far you move. If you move half an hour away, there's a minimal change. Guess what? If you're moving half an hour away, your environment's changing minimally in general. Okay. And so that minimal change of environment will be reflected in the chart. Likewise, if you're moving halfway around the world, you're going to see a more significant change because your environment is changing more significantly. And that's reflected in the chart, especially through the houses, whether you have placements in those houses or not. Now, I became really fascinated by locational astrology as a young person right away because it was something I had noticed because I had traveled young. In 1985, I was an exchange student to Belgium, and I noticed I was really different when I was in Belgium, and it was interesting to me. Of course, it was a big growth time, but going through Belgium and France and parts of Spain up into Scandinavia is a Jupiter crossing line and a Uranus crossing line because I have the Jupiter Uranus conjunction at 0 degrees Libra that everyone my age in a couple of weeks time has. Okay, like it's a 2 week period of time that they have that conjunction. And so those lines go through there. So it's a place I always have big awarenesses, a lot of growth. For me, it was really positive at the time, but I was also a little more gregarious. I was a little more willing to try things. I was a little more curious. At home, I was curious, but more in a sense to get to the root of things, to create new systems, because life was a little more stagnant where I lived. It was a little harder to get out of there, and it wasn't necessarily an environment that helped me thrive. So I was always deep diving, trying to transform, Scorpio rising, and change. I'm in Aries rising when I'm in continental Europe at the very early degrees. So when I get into Rouen, Brussels, oh, I think Americans say Rouen, France, when I'm in that area, I have Aries rising. It's very fascinating. So I'm a little more outgoing than being a Scorpio rising. Both Mars ruled, though. Both Mars ruled if we use classical rulerships. So very, very fascinating. When I went to university in England, it was a little different. I'm a little more outgoing. I'm a little more open to meeting people. I'm a little less hermitish, but I'm a lot more. My poetic side comes out, more winsome, more outwardly imaginative, less insular. Not manic pixie dream girl by any means, but I have a lot more overt metaphysical things happening. It was interior in the States. Here it's more exterior. People just walk up to me. Interesting happenings and phenomena happen around me, when I'm here. I was introduced to metaphysics in a very serious way at the age of 18 when I came here as a university student. It's funny, I was always trying to bat it away. I'm like, no, I'm a logical, rational academic. Don't throw this poppycock my direction. And there was really no escaping it, nor was there escaping my purpose and understanding of self because I have a Pisces North Node. So becoming myself and embracing that side of me was part of my journey when I'm in the UK. So it's always a special moment. In the last week, I've been observing how it's almost automatic when I'm here that I'm in the noticing. I'm always noticing the little ripples and dimples in a pond, the fluttering of the petals in the breeze of these beautiful flowers, and the wisteria is still blooming and moving in the breeze or the wind and the rustling of the leaves in the trees. And I have a notebook on me. My writer's self is satiated by the sensory input I get here. I could just sit in Hyde Park and write for hours, just all the words and feelings and sensations that come in. And so I noticed these things. And then when I moved to Bahrain in 1991, when I married my kid's dad, I was really social. And people looked to me to be social, which was really weird to me because I was always the nerdy academician that was a goody two shoes. And there I was in demand, and I was more willing to be social, and my hair even lightened. I used to have to go to the salon to get it back to the natural color because just in the sunlight, my hair, the blonde came out. And normally it's the red highlights or lowlights that I have naturally that show up. So I wondered why I was different in all the different places that I lived. And when astrology came my way and I began to understand how location based it is, I was like, well, can I look at relocation? And of course you can. And I saw, from a Scorpio rising to a Pisces rising to an Aries rising to a Gemini rising. And I'm like, well, that would explain how I met the world because the first house shows how you assert yourself. It shows how you put yourself out in the world. It shows kind of how you step into a room. So as a Scorpio rising, I walk into a room and I literally walk through the door, step to the side, sit back against the wall, take a look at my surroundings, know my exits, see if I want to be there at all. And then I walk in the room. I'll look for who looks nice, like I want to hang out with. Then my moon kicks in the 11th house. Who do I want to make friends with? Here in the UK, I'll walk in and I just kind of case the joint. It's like my little feelers are out. I walk around, I kind of mingle, I bump into a few people because, there's no boundaries, right? Well, my balance can be off here. I don't fall, but my balance is a little off. And it always has been. People used to think I was on something because it's like I have sea legs, you know. I'm Pisces rising. I'm still a Scorpio rising. It hasn't changed my interior self. It's how I operate in the environment. And I think that's an important thing to remember. You do not change in the interior necessarily. It's how you're moving through the exterior world And that helps change the interior, but you don't lose, like, chocolate is always chocolate. You can put amaretto in it, you can put mint in it, you can put gold in it. It's still chocolate, right? So you will always be you, and then there can be additions made that change the flavor of you. But you will always, at your root, be you. That's your natal chart. As you move and grow, you transform that. You transform who you are. Hopefully, you mature. At the same time, in your nexus, in the heart of who you are, that kernel of self remains. We have obscured memory of who we are. We often use the input that we've gotten over a lifetime to help self describe ourselves. And when you have those first house transits, that's when you are able to shake up what has been imposed upon you and get down to the root of who you were connected with as a child, because your identity is there from day one, and it shifts and changed based on outside input because you have nothing else to work with. When you're an infant, you don't have agency. You are reliant on the people in the environment around you, and that helps shape your understanding of self. And then you hit crisis points that help break through that. That's part of being human. But that natal chart, that essence of self, always remains. How you understand that as you grow and evolve and change, well, that too grows and evolves and changes. That's the emphasis of progressive evolutionary astrology that I like to bring through interpretation, is that expansion of awareness, that understanding of self in a different way. So your natal chart is always there, and yet if you relocate, you change your environment. You get to explore yourself in a different way and know yourself from different angles. So you can relocate. Where you live may not be the best place to thrive for you. Other people, that's the best it's ever going to be. There's nothing wrong with either direction. But I can tell you, if you decide to relocate because you hate the place, because it's boring and, everybody does the same thing every day, and you're going to bring those same attitudes with you if you haven't deconstructed or aren't in the process of deconstructing. You can always move away, but the issues, well, they come in the bags with you until you deal with it. So relocating isn't always the answer. And yet, for some people, it's the catalyst of deconstruction. It's the catalyst for renovation of self. It is a very individual process. There is no one size fits all in life. I know we like things in neat and tidy boxes. Human beings love that. We love typology. We love to be told what class we are, what category we are, because then we don't have to think about it too much, right? Thinking about it makes our brains hurt. I like that hurty sensation in the brain, but not everybody does. Remember, typology is a place to start. It is never the end. So just knowing your sun sign or knowing your rising sign or your moon sign, that's a place to start. It's not the end of the journey. So same with relocation. You can relocate and see, is it better for your career goals, your family goals? Is it better overall? Is it a place where you can grow and meet your ambitions? Is it a place you can find a cozy sense of home? It depends on each and every single person's perceptions, your background. That all has to be factored in. And for some people, it's absolutely world changing in a good way. And other people, depending on their mindset, it may not be the best thing for them. Mindset is everything. No, you can't change your life on mindset alone, but your mindset definitely is what colors your experience, regardless of circumstances, whether it's good, bad, in the middle, up and down, sideways, inside out. It doesn't matter. Mindset is how you're going to perceive things. So if you want to use your free will, if you want to use your agency as an adult with car keys and a job, or the potential to have those things, then it's going to take a little bit of work. There's no magic wand, not even a relocation. But if you're lucky and relocation works well for you, it can open your vistas. And so that's something I work with my clients on a lot. I help a lot of people move or find better ways to use the energy right where they're at. Because honestly, if you're not addressing things right where you're at, you're going to be addressing them from different angles, no matter what line you're on with the astrocartography laid out. So to bring it back full circle, astrocartography is not separate from astrology. It is a form of locational astrology, which has always been done. Location is always a factor in astrology, in how we make up charts, because especially in Western tropical astrology, we use a geocentric point of view, an earth-centered point of view, because we live on Earth. No, we know the Earth is not the center of our galaxy, our solar system. We know that. But it actually is to our human understanding. The Earth is the center of our personal universe because this is where we walk, move, and breathe. We can intellectually know we are not the center of everything. But to our physical experience, to the illusion of being physical on this planet at this time in this body, it is. It is. This is how we experience. You can have a world-changing event. Maybe it's a storm or a political activity or an economic situation. And even if it barely touches you, maybe you know someone who knows someone it impacts. You're going to try to personalize it to you. I see it every single day in my comments, every single day, where people are impacted in some way or attach impact to themselves through a world event. Because that is our understanding of how to go through life. And unless you are a philosopher, a dreamer, a creative thinker, 9 times out of 10, you're going to make these events personal. And that's why we use the geocentric point of view. And there's nothing wrong with being centric to the situation unless it's damaging your experience in life, which is why I warn you about falling prey to the propaganda and the disruption and the panic, because it's not giving you a quality of life. It doesn't mean it doesn't impact you either directly or indirectly. It's how you process that information that makes all the difference. Okay. So I think it's time for some community news, and welcome to our newest members to the Awake Space community. And I just want to remind you, as a new member, you have special savings. And that means if you've not been a member of the Awake Space community in the Patreon in the past, if you sign up in the next month, you save, I believe, 25% on annual subscriptions. So you'll see that publicly listed at the top in a banner. Make sure you check that out. I can't offer it to existing members. I wish I could. That's not my call. That is the platform's decision. I would love to give everybody little gifties, but there's a lot of great information, whether you're looking to learn more about astrology or how to dive in and use your own agency. I try to mix up the language so it's not all astrologicalese, because, things aren't going to get less disruptive as we go through the next couple of years and even decades. We're in massive systemic change, and we get to be part of that change. That's a privilege. It is a privilege to be alive at this time, at this place, in this body, and it doesn't always feel like a privilege. I know that. I know from firsthand experience, but I also know a few tips and tricks, skills, and frameworks that can help it be much more rewarding to be in a physical body at this time on this planet, moving through these changes and building the substructures necessary to make the future a lot more fun to be in. All right, let's get going with the community news. Well, without our community at the Awake Space, we wouldn't have a podcast. Thanks to our community, they sponsor this, and I don't have to work with corporate sponsors or deal with ads. Maybe one day I'll get that YouTube monetized. I haven't yet. Money is not my motivator. It's not. I learned how to use it and work with it But my motivator is always gaining experience, sharing experience, and building community. And that's something we've got to the nth degree in the Awake space. Just a wonderful group of people supporting members, that is the paying members at the $5 level and up, get access to our community chats, and some of those are tier dependent. But let me tell you, the lounge, the predictions thread, the creativity thread, these are all things everybody is welcome to. That's where my lives go through. For members, it's amazing. The amount of messages I've gotten in the last 6 weeks about how this community has been a lifeline for people as we go through these very strange, disruptive times as massive systemic change really kicks into gear. Nothing will ever be the same as it was. The big detonation happened in 2020, and in 2025, the Jenga tower fell. That was something I'd talked about for quite some time. And now the board is getting swept, and we have to look at building from bits of the foundation that still have integrity. And if you look at all the archaeology that's being done right now, where like even in Turkey, they've rebuilt this Greek amphitheater based off of the ruins they could find. And there were enough pieces with integrity that they could build this arena up as it had once been, like 2,500, 3,500 years ago. I don't remember. It's the one where they found the statue of Athena. Athena. And if you ever played Age of Empires, I think it might have been Zeus. I think it was Zeus. Something like that. It's one of those old civilization games. I am Athena. That came into my head as soon as I saw the statue, which is pretty cool. And Artemis too, going to the moon. Artemis, a moon goddess. Women are showing up in all kinds of different ways, and I wouldn't say that's the divine feminine. I would say that is femininity. You know, this idea that we're soft and obedient and compliant and submissive. Boy, isn't that a male-centric point of view? Patriarchy. And the women who support it. But I digress. Anyway, community news. Again, my thanks to our community. There are so many people who show up every single day to be a support, to check out the vending chambers, see who needs an extra bit of virtual hugs or just witnessing as they go through life. It's a great place to scream into the void. To the people who show up with their creativity and their tips and hints on gardening and food preparation and all those fun things. Not in a crazy prepper way, but in a realistic way. Who's been telling you for the last 6 years, grow something, anything, even if you can only grow microgreens or leafy greens? Well, look at where iceberg lettuce is now on those shelves. In some places it's almost $5 a head. So if you can, do it. We've got people who are experienced, willing to give you the information, give you references, get you out there finding the information you need to get started. What does that have to do with astrology? Everything. And if you are at the magazine level and up, remember, you get the gardening seminar and the little zine that I made for the astrology of gardening. It's a fun 1 hour lecture with an ebook that gives you some beginning tips and hints and vegetables that are pretty easy to grow, as well as my fairy salad recipe. That's right, edible flowers. It's pretty, it's fun, and my kids used to love that when they were little. What else is coming up? We're still going to be going live in both the Awake Space and in Laurie's Lab. Hold on Laurie's Lab. My daughter and I are just now sitting down to do schedules, so that'll come out this week. We also have Matilda and I have our event Charts and Channeling the 16th in the United States, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and 1 a.m. in the UK on the 17th. And if you're in Australia or in those time zones, then it's at 10 a.m. Eastern Australian Standard Time. There, I said it. So, without you, there is no me. I love to welcome our newest members, and I'll do that right now. Let's take a look. So many good people to thank. And I can't thank everybody. There's over 2,000 supporting members. That means paying members. We have over 5,000 free members. How cool is that? So we go live at least once a month for everybody, free and paid. And that's where we get deeper connections. You know, you get a little more of Laurie lore and we have fun. They're usually not safe for work. We're a little boisterous in there. And then, you know, when there's world events, things like that, I'll hop on. But yeah, so you can join it for free. I've got some free articles. I've definitely got free resources. Check out the pinned post, okay, for beginning astrology resources. And for deeper dives, it's written by tier and access level, but if you want a one stop for where everything is, that pinned post is gold, my friends. All right, let's get to it and think. I don't know how to pronounce this, and I'm going to do my best. So please, if I butcher your name, let me know the proper pronunciation. We've got Katarzyna or Zinya, Vonda, May, Kara or Kara, Demi, still me, Harmony, Jasmine, Unbothered Hand, Joey, Leslie, Shira, Amelia, Deborah, Jen, Sarah Rose, Katie, Beautiful Scars, Lydia, Jen, Hippie Mystic, Wendy, Susan, Amanda, Joanna, Molly, Amethyst, Gabriella, Ann, Claudia, Miranda, Jen, Catherine Marie, Daniela, Tara, Alyssa, Alexia, Barbara, Karen, Amanda, Joyce, Sue, Meredith, Lilith, Jackie, and Anna Carey. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of the Awake Space community. And make sure you come into the chats and say hello. There's no clicks. We don't do that. Everybody's welcome to come in. We are not here to be like-minded. We are here to be like-hearted. So people have their own points of view, their own way of expressing themselves. And as long as it's not harming everybody, we're okay with that. Holding different opinions is not a problem. Being mean is. So our main rule is don't be a dick. Okay? If you can follow that rule, you're all right. Okay, let's move on to answering questions. Some of those have to do with return charts, but there's a whole lot. So we're only going to get to some because I need to talk about that new moon in Taurus coming up at the beginning of next week. I've been asking our magazine subscribers to toss me questions to talk about on the podcast here. And man, this week people really came through. You can tell Uranus is in Gemini now. The questions are just popping. And they're good ones. Remember, the quality of the answer is wholly dependent on the quality of the question. So, like, if you ask me something like thoughts, I'm going to give you a sarcastic answer. Thoughts is not a good question. So I had a bunch of people on TikTok ask me about the hantavirus. I have personal experience with potential exposure to that. Not the Andes version. But a version common in the Pacific Northwest. And it is not easy to get, although I have known someone who did get it, and it was very life-changing. You don't want it. But my children and I had potential exposure to it, and not gonna lie, that was nerve-wracking. But it's not easy to contract. If it mutated or something, you know, but it's not like a coronavirus. There's a lot of things that are coronavirus, you know, the flus, different colds, those spread much easier. Follow the immunologists, follow the epidemiologists. Don't just believe Joe Schmo with a lot of opinions reading newspaper articles. Those articles and those headlines are designed to panic you. Please don't let them get to you. And don't argue with the PhDs. Just don't. Why would you argue with the PhDs? That's their job to know. And if you think, oh, it's because the CDC has been ransacked, yeah, that's a problem. It's a big problem. But before the coronavirus pandemic, most people had no idea what the CDC was, let alone who was in charge of it, unless they had a vested interest. And there's been many a health crisis you haven't heard about before and since. I'm not defending the current administration. That would be the last thing I'd ever do. But take a breath, listen to the actual experts, stop listening to talking heads. If they don't work in that field, if they're not a medical professional that specializes in that, because just because somebody has a doctorate doesn't mean they're a medical doctor or an immunologist or an epidemiologist. Vet your sources. But always approach things with caution. What can you do? You can wash your hands, wear a mask. You do things that mitigate exposure. Get vaccinated depending on what's coming up. Those are all important things. So, the questions for this week. I'm going to read you the questions and then I'm going to tell you the answers and which is going to be in the patron exclusive podcast. So let's see. I got a bunch. JC says, if we're on the cartography train, what would make a good indicator for someone to experience a transit in one location versus another? That's a great question. We'll probably answer that one here and then do a part 2 on the patron only. Genesee, like Tennessee. Got it. Genesee, what in astrology do you feel needs to be heard or focused on more? And what gets too much focus that you find as less demanding of your attention? My God, Genesee, I could write a book. Do I have thoughts on that? We'll try tackling a little bit of that here. That could be a whole episode. Ms. Laura Dubs, what inspired you to be an evolutionary astrologer? And what's the difference between American and European astrology? And that's a really good question as well. I think I'll tackle those here. Let's see, we've got people jumping on the astro-cartography pile. Not necessarily a question, says Shelby, but just jumping on the pile. It'd be cool to hear about your experiences living in different areas and how that astrologically affected you. I talked a little bit about that already on the podcast, but I think that's just a good thought to keep in mind. And over the next couple of weeks, I'll share my insights. And especially like this trip, last trip was its own thing. And you guys can read about that in the Laurie Thinks Out Loud, what is it, category collection. Sorry, it's late. My brain just went burp. In the collection, Laurie Thinks Out Loud, I wrote articles 2 years ago when I was traveling with my daughter. But yeah, I'm looking at things a little differently this time and to describe and even write about my experiences. So stay tuned for that. Alicia asks, adding to the astrocartography train, how was your Venus return in London and what insights did you have? How this played out compared to if I would have stayed in the States. I'll tackle that a bit in this episode, and it's another one of those. I think we'll just talk about it as time goes along. Ms. Laura Dubs asks again, can I just say that I love these calls for questions? You're welcome, Ms. Laura Dubs. Lisa asks a really interesting question. I think I'll answer this more deeply in the patron only, but we'll bring up the question right now and then we'll look at how we're going to answer that here. Ancestral tries to land in astrocartography. Mainly, I've been looking at places my ancestors have come from and the planetary lines and trying to learn about myself from this. I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, though, just something I thought about. I got that. So looking at places, I can't pronounce the place where your grandma came from, or I would mention it, but I don't want to butcher it. So anyway, yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. I'll talk a little bit here, but I'll definitely go more in depth in the patron only, in the community pod. So let's see, AG. The question is, what exactly is affecting us? Is it energy, gravity, the interactions between the placement of the planets? Like, how is the sausage made? So you're looking at, why does astrology work? Okay, like, why do we attribute the different energies to different ways consciousness expresses? And I can answer that here. I think that's an important question, but I could, you're probably not going to like the answer, is because it's a lot like because we said so, but we'll answer that. And then Andy asks, can you talk about the higher octave of, or Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury? I'm enthused on the groupthink versus someone's own intellect. I love when you talk about astrological transits and how it works. Thank you, Andy. That is its own podcast episode as well. But I'll answer it a little bit here and then in more depth for the patron only pod. So let's go to the astro-cartography questions first. So JC's question about dealing with a transit. So first of all, transits and planetary returns are both the same and different. So when you're looking at transits, they're on the outside of the natal wheel. Okay, so you have your birth chart, and then when you make a chart that shows the transits to the natal chart, those are outside of it because the moving energy is moving around the static energy of the snapshot of time and space crystallized into physical form, which is you. That's your birth chart. You and your birth chart. You're synonymous. The transits are impacting you in different sectors of life, okay, or arenas of life. That's what the houses are, and there's signs in the houses, and blah, 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 blah. So, first of all, by transit, unless you're going to stay somewhere for a really long time, just going somewhere for a day isn't going to change your relationship to the transit itself. The transit will continue transiting the natal chart. You could do it comfortably or uncomfortably, I suppose, but even if you thought you were seeking comfort, if it's a transit where you have to do some deep thinking and deep diving and healing, believe it or not, even going to a beach with a Mai Tai may not be giving you what you thought you were going to get. A return chart is a different story. So even though, yes, a return, a planetary return, whether it's a lunar return, a solar return, a Venus return, a Mars return, a Saturn return, yes, it is a transit. And that transit starts when the planet is within orb of the natal placement. But the return itself makes a chart. Okay, so your natal placement is like a default setting. A return chart shows a theme for a period of time that is based on your natal chart, but it's separate. It's its own thing. It shows a theme. Okay, so for transits, you're going to go through it no matter what is going to happen, just like you're going to have a return no matter what. If you want to set the return chart in a more amenable situation, then yeah, a relocation can help. In my case, with this Venus return, I did something I've never done. I've always lived with the return as it was because I had very wise teachers. I had some famous ones that people have heard of, but I've also had people who were extremely accomplished astrologers that nobody had ever heard about, that had immense backgrounds and who had studied with, amazing, masterful astrologers. And so when I was a young woman learning astrology, these guys were like, well, you can relocate, but you're missing this, this, and this. So I'd look at a solar return and be like, oh no, it's an 8th house solar return. They're like, well, you're not going to die. That's not what that means, you know? And they'd be like, you have to transform. Well, I did need to transform back then. I needed to vastly shift my perceptions of myself, of how the world viewed me, of my interactions with other people. That, I had experienced a great deal of adversity as a young person, as a child. And my perceptions of myself and the world were skewed, about what I deserved, what I didn't deserve, what I needed to earn, what I didn't need to earn, what I needed to prove, what I didn't need to prove, what my value was. what I deserved in relationship and agreement across the board, not just romance. And I might be only looking at something like black and white, good and bad, especially when I was younger, right? Because I had the same social training everybody else does. And I had the religious training and all the beliefs. Those were all up on deck. And so, especially Cosmo, who was in his 90s at the time. So I'm beginning my life in my mid 20s, and Cosmo is at the end of his in his 90s. He was born in the early 1900s. He wasn't born at 1900, but close. And he really taught me about perspective and experience and why it matters. And I still had the hubris of a young astrologer, and he never gave me a hard time for it. He'd laugh at me, you know. But Cosmo, and that was his real name, guys. That wasn't just like a username on the internet. He was an astrologer named Cosmo, and I think that's very cool. He impressed upon me that I wasn't seeing everything, and that I might just want to go through the experience and record it. And I had stinking thinking, you know. I had seen enough, been through enough that my expectations of good things were low. They were low, and I was always pleasantly surprised when they happened. Because for me, the habit was when life got good, things went away. I lost people. I lost things that mattered to me. You know, I had to make these life and death decisions a lot, and there was always loss involved. And that was really hard to deal with, you know. And I think a lot of people can understand that, especially when times are difficult like they are now. It's easy to worry about the closet of shoes getting ready to drop or the rug being pulled out from you. You're like, oh, I have this opportunity, you know. It didn't mean I didn't do well. It didn't mean I didn't succeed or meet goals. I also had unreasonably high expectations on myself as a young person, especially if you're under-resourced or under-networked. You know, those things matter. It's not just what you know. There's a reason I say knowledge isn't power unless you know how to use it. And some of that is through connecting with other people. And I wasn't good at picking out the right people. It took me a long time to learn that. I was really good at getting teachers. Okay. That was about it. I chose not to relocate for a lot of those returns until this year. You know, this year I decided to because A, it was easy for me to do. I was already coming this direction anyway. It was just a matter of deciding which date. And it fit with the goals of the year. It was like, oh my God, that's exactly what we've been planning. This one, please. The other one, and this kind of, there was a second question asking, you know, how would it have been different if I was in the States? It would have been more planning. You know, it would have been more set up. It still would have happened, and more stuff would come out of the blue instead of showing up. Stuff will still show up with this experience. So it's a 14-month theme. It's not just the day itself. It's a theme. That chart shows information for 14 months out into the future. So, interesting things were already happening before I left. I had the week before the return were some very, very fascinating and interesting events and things that came out of left field. And I think more of that might have happened. I think I have to be more strategic with this one, which is something I plan on being. And my daughter and I were already planning on the things like the branding and upping the quality, getting some different podcasts out that aren't astrologically focused per se. Everything I do is astrological, but I don't always use astrologicalese. I don't always speak in the astrological terms, you know. So, like Healing the Money Wound, the book, the framework for rebuilding confidence, value, and wealth. There's no astrology outright in there. I've translated it all because astrology deals with every aspect of life. And if you want to be a really good astrologer, you need to have a lot of information about a lot of things. It is a polymaths game. If you're going to be a masterful astrologer, it's not just about getting out a book and reading definitions. That's a place to start. It's not a place to finish. Okay, it's a stepping stone, but it is not the cooked full meal deal. So I hope that answered those questions. Let's see. Genesee, what in astrology do you feel needs to be heard or focused on more? And what gets too much focus and I find as less demanding of my attention? God, so many things. This is a hard one to answer. I could answer this every episode. I think there is an overfocus on the big three. I think the big, the my sun, moon, and rising, or however people want to express that big three, because it's a great icebreaker. It's a great thing to have at a networking event or a party to get talking to people, but it has no more depth than that. I think a lot of people will bring their biases into the table because, like some people are like, I hate Geminis or I hate Scorpios or I hate Leos. And you really don't. You probably know people with placements in all those signs, and you probably have placements with those signs as well. Or everybody has all 12 signs in their chart, whether you have a placement in it or not directly. So a lot of times when we don't like certain energy, it's because it's a reflection back to an aspect of self we don't like about ourselves. But when it comes to the big three, it's like saying I was born in this country, in this province or state, in this city. And you can nod your head and say, okay, all right, it's an American from Oregon who was born in Portland. And you can make assumptions about that, and some of them might be pretty accurate, but it's really not going to tell you a whole lot more about the person than that. So, you know. Um, what else? Transit's out of context. If you're a cardinal sign, this is what this means for you. Notice I don't do a lot of those. I could probably get a lot more traffic if I did, but it's bad astrology. So I think a lot of times people overemphasize the outer planets to the detriment of what's happening in the interior. There's that as well. So that's my short answer. But again, I could probably do a whole podcast series, not just an episode, on that very question. So if you have follow-ups for that, let me know in the Q&A magazine deep dive chat. Ms. Laura Dubs, what made me want to be, or what inspired me to be, an evolutionary astrologer? So when I first started studying astrology, I didn't realize there were so many branches, and psychological astrology was really prevalent. And I was interested in that. And then I was lucky enough, and I mean that, lucky enough to have teachers who demanded I learn mundane astrology on top of personality and psychological astrology because they were trained old school. But at the time, it was considered not done because it was equated to fortune telling, which is very different. Fortune telling and forecasting are two different things. So I kind of took to mundane like a duck to water because of my background as a political analyst. Very similar skill sets. I mean, I always say it's data analysis, but evolutionary astrology, it's funny, I was introduced to esoteric astrology around the same time, and both mattered a lot to me. I have spent my whole life needing to believe in something bigger than me, understanding smaller than small and bigger than big. My interaction with quantum mechanics theory in college, being forced to take that class, vastly shaped my worldview. And I just couldn't imagine we were just destined to have these experiences like video game characters or characters in a book where, you're born with this one intent and you get no wiggle room. In my book, Healing the Money Wound, I dedicate it to my 15-year-old self. Okay. Or the acknowledgments are to my 15-year-old self. It's dedicated actually to my daughter for being the light on my path, forcing me to be a better human. But at 15, I was told I'd always be broken because of what had happened to me and that I would never be okay. That I'd just have to cope and suck it up and have a shitty life. And I didn't believe that at 15. I was like, I don't believe we're fated to have it all good, all bad. I know I have had good things happen. I don't see why I would always struggle. I had to believe in order to survive that things could and would be better. And to me, that's evolutionary. I call what I do, the brand of astrology, I do progressive evolutionary astrology. And the reason I do that is from the very beginning. I did not like the overly what we now call binary thinking. That, it's such social constructs and ideas of gender when we're interpreting astrology, the meanings of them, of the placements, the signs, etc. And I think it was 97 or 98 when Jeffrey Wolf Green's work, and it could have been later, it might have been 99, where his work came into my field of view and Stephen Forrest's work came, and it mirrored a lot of the esoteric writings I had read on the soul's intent for being here. Whether it was Seth Speaks or the Alice Bailey work or Annie Besant, Rudolf Steiner, even, Buckminster Fuller, who wasn't known for his metaphysics. He was, a social experimenter. And Carl Jung's work, of course, universal symbolism. And Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a massive influence in my life. I found his book, Man's Search for Meaning, in the library when I was like 11 or 12. And reading that changed everything for me. It's not a very long book. It's not a hard read. It's hard subject matter, but I was like, man, if he could go through that, I can survive what I'm going through back then. So I just had this problem with people telling you can have a good life. So I ran into Jeffrey Wolf's Green and Stephen Forrest's work early on, and Arroyo's as well. And I got to take a pre-conference workshop at NORAC with Jeffrey Wolf Green on a totally separate subject. It was like medical astrology or something. And that was back in 2001. And he was just a really fascinating teacher, thinker, philosopher. And I was already leaning in that direction. I think I've always leaned more to how can I evolve as a human being? Self-actualization has always been something really important to me. And I felt if we just interpreted with determinism in mind, we really robbed people of potential experiences. So thank you for that question. But that's how it happened. It's never just one thing. I think I was always that way, just naturally. But at the same time, when these things showed up, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And then, like I said, I just think, we can always stand upon the shoulders of giants, but we can also refine and improve things. So that's why I added the progressive part. It's not a political perspective per se, or a partisan perspective. It is really about progressing our understanding of what it is to be human and to evolve. And it's not all based around procreation or past lives, etc. And I promised on a TikTok I would talk about past lives. So if you're in the magazine tier and you have questions around past lives, please put them in. I don't negate that they're real. I've had my own fair share of past life experiences. I think there's an overemphasis on that. It's easy to get distracted and forget about living in this body in this time. And so managing that interconnection through time and space and experience is important to help us use that knowledge instead of be pulled by it. But anyway, so that's why I chose to do that. These are really good. Okay. What's the difference between American and European astrology? I think that's a really good question. I think mindset. I think the perception and how the interpretations work. Emphasis on houses. I find that there's a greater emphasis on house meanings, especially in like UK astrology. Now, in European, you have to remember there's lots of different countries, lots of different cultures, and interpretation is always cultural. So my experience is more with British astrologers and people with a background that would equate with British astrology. And so there's just kind of a little, it's nuanced. The differences are nuanced. I think in America, there's often less nuance in the interpretation, a lot more emphasis on weighing and measuring things. that can happen in British astrology too, but I find there's more of a search for understanding in European interpretation. And in the French books I've been reading as I build my French vocabulary up to speak about astrology, I'm finding in the French books that there's actually it's a more poetic understanding of the soul. There's a lot more emphasis on the soul and the spirit and understanding the different layers of what animates us as humans. So there's that. That was a great question. Alicia, I talked a little bit. How was my Venus return in London? It was really good. It was really good. It was a really interesting it was a really interesting day. It was a beautiful day. I got to see beautiful things. I got to experience a really lovely tea with my daughter. And I was really tired. I can just really tired. And I just let myself be taken care of, which was great. See, I'm going to wind up with Lissa's question. So let me go to AG's. What makes astrology work? What is it? So here's the deal. Astrology is a system that kind of symbolically maps out our being spiritual beings having a human experience. We are spirit made matter on a material plane. Okay. What makes all of that work? Well, nobody has the actual answer as to why astrology works the way it works. We know the sun and moon have causality on the planet, right? Solar flares impact the planet, lunar movements impact the planet. There's a relationship that does involve gravity, electromagnetism, all of that fun stuff. But the further out, I mean, I think the inner planets need to be looked at more because I do think they might have more causality, but we don't have any proof. Okay. So why can't really be answered because we have never had it studied with good parameters. But the planets aren't causal anyway. I think they're reflective. I think the future is a tree with many branches and it can look like destiny. It can look like fate. But in between A and B, if A is the starting point and B is the event, you'll see a million infinitesimal, I can't say the word, teeny, tiny micro decisions made in every moment that builds to an outcome. So there really isn't a why. How do we know it works is because there is over 5,000 years of documentation. And I want you to visualize this, and this will blend into the ancestral question. I want you to visualize no light other than the stars and the galaxies. No light pollution, no torches, no LEDs, no cars. And you're in a field on a hill and you're looking up, and the very, very brightest objects that appear most of the time in the same spots during certain seasons, during certain times of year. Sometimes they're rising in the sky in the morning and sometimes they're setting at night. Venus, right? And we couldn't see Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, so put those to the side. The Mercury through Saturn is what we could see with the naked eye, plus the sun and the moon, with all of the other stars present. So imagine the brilliance that people were able to notice and then record. And the earliest forms would have been looking at the lunar cycles and the solar cycles. That's why there were sun gods, moon gods. Those are the most common. And then they associated gods with the other planetary movements. We gave meaning to things we observed, and we gave meaning through religious or spiritual or superstitious, however you want to view it, because they're all kind of intertwined to make sense of it. But we don't know why. Why is not one of the questions that can be answered there until it's studied. I would say it's probably, in my understanding and what makes me feel comfortable, is it's quantum physics. We're all intertwined. The hip bone's connected to the thigh bone. Like, why wouldn't different energies play a role? And we've assigned meaning to the symbols that we use to represent that energy. That energy could be a combination of a lot of different things. So The sun could be a combination of a lot of different things. The moon could be a combination of a lot of different things. Venus could be a combination, etc., etc., etc. But for our purposes, that's what those things mean. There's a spectrum of expression, but they have basic interpretations, and we work with those. So a lot of it is just like when I was 14 and I was in an algebra class. I think it was algebra 1 or algebra 2. Anyway, Mr. Owens was my teacher, and he was writing an equation on the board. And I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's right connected with this. So he wrote down A plus B equals C. And he wrote them in different colors on the board. And all of a sudden, I had what a lot of people call a download. But if you can imagine, like, the stream of consciousness just hitting and slamming into me, and visuals popping left, right, and center. And it was like, like if you have those scenes in movies or TV shows, static photos, or you're going through the Willy Wonka tunnel, that kind of thing. I'm 14 years old. I can't even remember what I was wearing because I looked super cute that day. Remember, I was 14. I had these red little flats with kitten heels, and I was wearing my little lace bobby socks and my cute little peg leg jeans and a cute little off the shoulder top because we could show shoulders back in the 80s because people knew shoulders weren't sexual objects. Anyway, anywho, I had ribbon in my hair because it was cute. I felt cute that day, which was rare at 14. Anyway, my mind was blown and I raised my hand and Mr. Owens called on me and I said, it's all made up. It's all made up. What if A isn't A at all? What if we just think it's A? What if it's actually Y? And what if B isn't B? What if it's actually D? And how do you know it equals C? What if it doesn't equal C? What if it equals F? You know, we're just we're just believing this is real and it's all made up. Everything's made up. This desk is made up. The school is made up. We're made up. And luckily Mr. Owens knew I wasn't on drugs because I wasn't. My brain just talk about mind blown and the illusion of separation and seeing through the veil of illusion that is our life on planet Earth in systems that we create, right? And he said, Laurie, you're going to confuse everybody, so I'm going to ask you to just sit there with that. Those are some pretty big ideas. We'll talk after class. And I was like thinking, oh great, he thinks I'm crazy, I was writing stuff down. I was just like, oh my gosh, this blue could be purple and green could be azure, chartreuse could be puce, it could be opposites. It could be to the side. It could be lateral, everything was crazy to me. There wasn't any good. There wasn't any bad. They were just moral assignments and gender roles. And so imagine a massive deconstruction moment. Super fun. Um, and after class, he called me up and he said, hey, you did really good there. You held it together. Those are some really big ideas. Have you studied Einstein? I was like, well, I've read his autobiography. I like autobiographies, but I haven't studied the math. I'm not very good at math. He goes, I disagree. I think you're really good at math. And when you're in college, I want you to study experimental math. And I was like, okay. Did I? No. No, I did not. But I was forced to take quantum mechanics theory, and trust me, my ability to think that weird way really helped. But he looked at me and I said, but it's not real. Why are we having to learn it? And he said, because it's an assumed truth. We've all agreed that this is going to be real. We're having a shared reality. And you're right. It could be completely wrong. I was like, but if it's completely wrong, what's going on? And he's like, if everybody is agreeing on it and it's working, then the results that work are what matters. It's the end point that matters. Is it working? Yes. Do we know why it's working? Not really. And so I think that's as good as an answer as any. Good old Mr. Owens, if he's still around and somebody knows him. Thank you, Mr. Owens. You helped a lot. So there's that. Good question. It was a really good question, and I'm sorry the answer is a little frustrating. Let's talk a little bit about the higher octave of Mercury, Uranus. Thank you for asking, Andy. You're enthused to think about the difference between groupthink and individual consciousness. So, again, we go back to assumed truths. All right. So, groupthink is really based on we all have to agree on this one thing. We're all going to use the same slogans. We're all going to use it's like lockstep. Okay. That's groupthink. And people often use words without great defining. Whereas individual consciousness you have a definition of what change means to you. But when you're in a group and everybody goes, change we can believe in, something like that, right? Well, each individual isn't asking the group what each person in the group means by that. What does change you can believe in look like? That's a really powerful question. What does it look like to you? Without those conversations, that groupthink is very empty and very dangerous because it leads to disenfranchisement. Whereas if you, as individuals, have a very clear understanding of what that means and have conversation with other, then you elevate the conversation and you disrupt the system's thinking to build something better, stronger, newer, up to date with the times. Whereas in just regular groupthink, you don't. So Uranus actually governs both the groupthink and the disruptive thought. It depends on how it's expressing. Remember, we have a spectrum. So from the default setting to the expansiveness, and it's not from the groupthink to disruptive rebellious behavior at all. That's actually all in the same spectrum down here in that same frequency. Because if you're rebelling and you're just pushing against, you're not creating anything new, you're not expanding, you're perpetuating a cycle usually of violence. So there's that. So that's what I can say to that. Now let's go back to Lissa's question. And I'll answer this more in depth in the patron only, but I think it's worth a tender hand. So, ancestral ties to land and astrocartography. So, astrocartography isn't about that necessarily. It might be an intuitive trigger for you to think about things, like you mentioned in your question, but and your chart can show location to a certain degree because remember the astrocartography is your chart laid out on a map. Um it will always be a relation to you and your walk because you have to remember your family is really wide. Hopefully it is. It's a wide tree. And your chart will show your connection to previous existences of that tree, whether it's your paternal line, your maternal line. I can see that in a chart. Okay. But you're really looking at fourth, eighth, and 12th houses. The fourth is your immediate family and your matrilineal line. The eighth house will be the ancestors you've got their DNA like strongest from. You have connected to cultural, social traditions in a different way. It's your inheritance. And inheritance isn't always money. It's not. So it could be various intuitive abilities. It could be a lineage passed down. It could be like in the case of Wendy, it could be, one of the questions I asked her that I'll never forget in a reading. I didn't know anything about her. And I was like, oh, hey, there's like this traditional belief system that you're connected to, and you've got a grandmother or a great grandmother that's really kind of coming to you either in dreams or through thoughts, etc., trying to help indoctrinate you into this family tradition, but it's metaphysical. It could be healing, it could be being a priestess, it could be blah blah blah. And she was like, oh, well, let me tell you. So you can look at astrocartography for that, but those lines go through a lot of places. Those lines go across latitudes and longitudes, not just a specific place. So those lines indicate where you transform, grow, attract, assert, where you're energized, where you're lower energy, those kinds of things. As far as ancestral work, that's really more of an esoteric astrology matter. And I'm not going to say you're doing it wrong. What I'm going to say is if it provoked those thoughts, then it did its job. But I wouldn't overly associate a lot of astrology to it without background training, if that makes sense. I'll talk about this more in depth in the patron only. But these were great questions. Thank you guys. All right, I'm going to end the podcast on talking about how to get ready for that new moon in Taurus because it is delicious. So we've got that new moon in Taurus happening on the 16th. And then we've got Mars entering Taurus on the 18th and Venus entering Cancer on the 18th, which I find really interesting. All of this is about stability. All of that is about stability. And the new moon is always a time to set intentions. And with it being in Taurus, it is about being grounded. And I wouldn't be grounded in any societal or cultural perspective, but really being grounded inside of yourself, really tuning into what makes you feel satiated, satisfied, connected to yourself. Like what makes you feel held besides being held? What is that cozy feeling inside, right after a good meal where maybe you need to take a nap? It's so good. That kind of feeling. This new moon is happening in the later degrees of the sign. I believe it's happening at 25 and some change. And that means it's a project already in process. So practicing feeling secure inside of yourself, not being overly reliant on outside circumstances. Yes, we all need food, water, shelter. How we go about getting that, how we go about enjoying that is another issue. And one of the things about Taurus is it's all things that appreciate. And appreciate means gain in value. So when we learn to appreciate what we've got that's already working, what we've got, like, you know how it is where you're like, I don't have anything to eat in the house, but you do. You do. You just don't want to cook. There's a big difference. If your pantry is full of yummy food or the ingredients to make yummy food, you can appreciate that into a meal. Okay. That kind of thing. So look at your projects, things like that. Going down through the magazine. And again, I want to remind magazine subscribers that you get the new and full moon information in the magazine every single month, including journal prompts. So I'll give you a taste of that here. This new moon is really powerful. Don't let anybody talk you out of setting your intentions. There isn't a new moon you can't do that, even if it were an eclipse and it's not. You can set intentions. There's never a bad time to manifest. There's bad ways of looking at manifesting, but there's no bad time to set intentions for manifestation, which means to reveal. Okay, that's what the word means. All right. So here's what the moon is doing. I'm just going to read a little bit from the magazine here to give you a taste because this happens every month. So you get the new moon and the full moon info. So the new moon in Taurus is going to slow things down so you can build something that lasts. You're building security forward. If you've been overly reliant on corporations, other businesses, not looking at your own skill sets, not looking at how you can build your own stability forward, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. I'm not saying you're all going to lose your jobs. I'm not, but you want to build your own security. Okay? And you got to do this with a steady, practical, and focused point of view. This isn't about get rich quick. This isn't about, jump out of your job and be successful in 3 weeks. Doesn't happen that way. Remember, you're setting intentions during the new moon to see some fruition in the full moon. So you may already be working on something. It could be making sure your garden's put together. It could be making sure you're setting up paperwork correctly for yourself. Your systems for receiving are in good stead. You're working on those things. It could be paperwork. It could be finances. It could be less investments, but more like putting your money to work. I wouldn't jump all in with my savings account on anything. Never leave yourself without a cush. You could be looking at a side gig to bring in more money to make that cush or that nest egg bigger and better. So the question you really want to ask yourself is, what do I have that I want more of? And what can I build with? What I already have to work with this new moon. It's, trying to ask for the magic bullet or the magic wand to work for you is probably not going to get you where you want to go. So, you can find out more by going to the Awake Space and grabbing a copy of the magazine, or if you're a subscriber, download it. I'll put the link in the show notes. This is a really, really powerful new moon. And I would be setting intentions around what makes me feel stable, what makes me feel comfortable. The more you focus on why you're not stable, what you have against you, why your circumstances suck, the harder it's going to be to make things happen that really benefit you over time. Like, it really matters how you accept things. So the more you're sitting there asking with your hands closed, please, 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 the less you're able to receive. So you can set intentions around being receptive and appreciating of the opportunities that come your way. It may not be the dream job, but it could be with the company that is perfect for what you need and gives you a foot in the door. Needing everything perfect on entry is going to really hold you back because you're making it more difficult to reveal itself to you. You want to make things easy to be revealed. And that's on you. That's on your intentions. That's on your perceptions. And we can blame the past all we want, but we're living in the here and now, and we got to deal with the present moment. And in the present moment, pretty much everybody's on even ground. So there's that. Alrighty. It is time for me to take a rest. So I think it's time to wind up the podcast. I want to thank each and every one of you for listening, whether you're a community supporter or, just tuning in for the first time. If you're one of the free members of the Awake Space, I want to thank you, especially for being a believer in what we do. Please listen and comment on our videos on all of our socials. That is very helpful, and it helps get the word out about what we do. And if you're a magazine subscriber and up, if you liked those Q&As, well, keep the Q&As coming. Make sure you see the Q&A thread / community chat, and we'll help make sense of it together. Alrighty, I'm Laurie Rivers, your host, and I look forward to talking to you next week.